happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode, very special episode of CANiVISION Live. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce two of my great friends in and outside of the industry today, Dr. Dan Price and Mila Diamond. Dr. Dan is a cannabis doctor and also a medical cannabis consultant in the industry, working for several large companies. Mila is a Tedx coach, both on the speaking side, and she's been a speaker herself too. And she is a Fortune 500 enterprise and executive business coach. And she's helped me through a lot of stuff. She's a meditation specialist, and two awesome people. I'm just very, very happy to have them both on with us today. And for the great people at home, because I did not give your introduction any service at all. If you guys can just give us a brief introduction of who you are and what you're doing and where we can find you.
That's the hard part when you ask me to talk about myself. I personally don't consider myself a speaker per se. I do speak on the topics that I'm passionate about. So that is primarily, I am a trained Buddhist monk, as you guys know. Personal development, spirituality from the non-denominational point of view is where I'm at. As a good friend just recently said, gave me a quote that I would rather have a mind open with wonder than the one closed by belief. So that's where I'm at. And yes, I have worked as a management consultant for Fortune 500 companies, and have been teaching meditation, personal growth, and doing life coaching for many years. Eventually left my corporate career just to do life coaching full-time because that's what I love, as well as business and executive coaching, of course. Right. And I work with people who specifically are in business or very focused on their career, because the methods that I used are best suited for people who want to succeed in the world, not necessarily those who just want to retreat in mountains. Because how can you help people if you're retreating? You're not with them, right? Right. And when I work with people, I often work with complex PTSDs that people suffer with. And complex PTSD is something that starts from childhood, perhaps traumas of childhood, and they get accumulated and layered on, and often get exacerbated by combat. I work with US veterans, so that's pretty much my passion, and that is what I do. And I just would like to quickly give a couple of words about Rico and Dr. Dan. Rico, I have met probably, couple of years now? Yes, exactly 2 years. He was we invited him to be MC at our TEDx talk, at our TEDx conference where I was speaking, and he did an amazing job and landed his own TEDx talk right there. And as we were celebrating our TEDx conference completion and successful presentations, we were celebrating, and Rico and I started talking, and that's how we started getting to know each other and started working together on his TEDx talk. And of course, like Rico, you have mentioned that immediately it was apparent, like all TEDx talks, they go so deep that they uncover a lot of traumas and conditioning, because in TEDx talks, we really want to be authentic. We want to be completely truthful. People who are primarily watching TEDx talks are very intelligent. It's a special group of people, international, very large, highest credibility. When we do these talks, we need to dig deep for truth within ourselves. And so when we started working with Rico, of course, it was a very challenging process, primarily not so much from the talk point of view, but from uncovering the challenges that you were going through. And you had this tremendous courage, which I commend you for, to be honest, to be authentic, look into it, and go through that pain that you had to look into from your childhood. And a lot of it, like you said, was very cathartic. And your talk is phenomenal. And anybody, please look up Rico's TEDx talk. It's phenomenal. I'm so proud of him. I can't say enough. And shortly,
I
like,
had a great coach.
thank you,
An
thank you.
excellent coach who pushed me to the edge, and I didn't fall. So
Yeah, I was there to catch you every time.
and where can the good people find you at home, Mila?
Um, they can find me at miladiamond.com, and they could see my TEDx talk by Mila Diamond TEDx talk on YouTube, and you will see that.
Excellent.
And very shortly, of course, we continued our collaboration with Rico, who introduced me to his extensive work network. And Rico, in his own turn, is amazing, absolutely amazing business networker and people networker. He brings the best people together and brings the best in people. That's how I see Rico. And Rico was the one who introduced me to Dr. Dan, who was a speaker at one of the conferences that Rico put up in University of Irvine, I believe, and that's where I connected with Dr. Dan, and we started working together as well. And Dr. Dan, in his own turn, in his own right, is amazingly in-depth, knowledgeable medical doctor who worked across borders, worked in many different cultures. He speaks many languages completely fluently. He worked in trauma centers, and healing is his calling, is his passion, and we connected with him on that level very much. And for many years, I think 5 years, did you say, or 6, right, Dr. Dan? You that you discovered cannabis, was it 5 or 6 years ago now?
Yeah, it was maybe 7 years ago now, but
7.
I never tried cannabis at all until I was 40 years old.
Right. And then when you tried it, you realized that it's actually a medicine that could heal people. It's not just some kind of a drug that was scheduled. It's a plant that has been used by Native American traditions for thousands of years, and it is a medicine in its own turn. But there is, of course, a science to that medicine. And for the past year and a half, Dr. Dan and I have been working closely together, exploring that from different angles and working on bringing cannabis science and cannabis medicine to the mainstream and to hospitals and to medical professionals.
So I trained pretty standard medical training. I have an MD, and I did my residency training in emergency medicine and trauma. And then I did a fellowship in air medical transport and trauma. So I flew on helicopters for 3 years and did a lot of research. I was in academic medicine. Most of my career was spent at Highland Hospital and Trauma Center in Oakland. So I saw a tremendous amount of all kinds of different illnesses and injuries. And I came to realize at one point that as I learned more about cannabis, after having my own experience, like Mila had mentioned, I have back pain from athletic injuries. And I tried this mixture of CBD and THC that was in a 1-to-1 ratio, which has been studied and found to be very effective for pain. And I tried it. I had no expectations. I didn't think it was going to work. I figured, this was like snake oil, because how can it treat nausea and cancer and pain and sleep and all of these different things? And I was unaware of the endocannabinoid system at that time, but I tried it, and I had one of those aha phenomenons where it was an epiphany. I was like, oh my God, this is medicine. This is really medicine, because it was as effective as an opioid, but it didn't make me feel weird like an opioid, and it didn't have the high addiction potential and risks even to life in overdose that opioids do, or even ibuprofen will ruin your kidneys or cause ulcers and so forth. And as I saw patients in the emergency department, I started to identify a lot of people that could definitely benefit from the use of cannabis as a medicine, but all we did was prescribe prescription medications that had a lot of side effects and didn't necessarily work as well as cannabis. And it took me a while to, I live in California, and we've had a medical cannabis law since 1996, but I was afraid to recommend it to patients because I thought the DEA would put me on a list and they would deny me my license to prescribe controlled substances, which is sort of a kiss of death to a doctor.
Right.
It took me several years before I started talking to patients about it. And then a couple more years after that, before I did my first medical cannabis consultation and writing an official letter of recommendation, which is the legal document that was required in California at the time. I had the opportunity actually to start doing that more full time. And I worked with a company that was quite progressive at the time called Meadow MD. And I was their primary physician. And we did house call consultations. And so I went around the San Francisco Bay Area and did consultations in the offices of Airbnb and the home of one of the founders of Reddit, one of the people that wrote code for FaceTime and Gmail, and executive vice presidents at Apple and so forth. And a lot of, as Rico and I were talking, a lot of former NFL players who had real problems that cannabis was a unique solution, but it's a complex plant. There are over 500 different chemicals in the plant, and knowing how best to use it so that you minimize the negative effects and maximize the benefits is where I really saw my role in as a consultant. And I've had the chance to work as a medical director for different cannabis companies, including Tikkun Olam, which is the largest supplier of medical cannabis in the state of Israel. They're branching out into other countries, including the United States. And that also gave me a real interesting insight into the cannabis industry and how cannabis can be used as medicine, because they were able to do a lot of the research on cannabis because it was in Israel, where they have a much more progressive medical system, and it's not limited by our Schedule 1 classification of cannabis here in the United States. So I've had a wonderful opportunity to really dig into cannabis as medicine and have learned a lot about that. And treating the opioid crisis and opioid addiction is a big part of that. And I really appreciate the opportunity for us to have the dialogue today and discuss this important use of cannabis in an area that's so critical that we address as a country and as a world, in the world.
It's important. I can't wait to have this conversation too. So let's hop on to it.
Rico, thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview. I'm really excited about it. I loved your TED Talk, and I actually included a link to the TED Talk in my paper on how cannabis can help people overcome opioid addiction. The paper is going to be used as an article, Medium, Tikkun Olam website, and other relevant channels. And in your TED Talk, you discussed the story of how you were prescribed opiates to treat chronic pain from athletic injuries and eventually became dependent on them in order to function in your daily life. I think it's very courageous of you to talk openly about your experience. And I know that your intention was helping other people who might face similar struggles or have people they care about that do. Could you please just briefly describe your journey with opioids?
Yeah. So I was never really into painkillers or anything like that. I'd never taken anything more than Tylenol, Advil, aspirin, like growing up. And the weird thing about becoming an athlete on the collegiate level, I was recruited out of high school and played football, college football at Northwestern University. We were given these sample packs. And that was like the weirdest thing.
Oh my God.
Ever, right? And so you would go through a tough practice.
Substance as candy.
Yes, like literally, we were beta testing for big pharma as collegiate athletes on the highest level. And you'd have a tough practice, have a sprained ankle, or you're sore, you're beat up, you have a hematoma or whatever, and they would like literally give us these big sample packs of Melexicam, Vioxx. Those were the big ones then, and I think both of them are off the market now for like contributing to like heart failure and strokes. And they would just toss these things to us and tell us to come in the next day and just give them our assessment of how the medicine worked or how it didn't work. And it was just the norm. And then for like the larger issues, we would we'd have to sign a waiver, obviously, so we couldn't sue them later on. But let's say it was a big game, we just get cortisone shots for everything, right? And whether you pulled a hamstring, you tore a ligament, it didn't matter. If you were an essential asset to the team, you were a starter or even second string, you were expected to play, even on the highest of levels. And if you didn't, you would lose your spot. So I took a couple of cortisone shots to continue to play, and they've been haunting me ever since. When I actually recognized the fact that I was addicted, it was a senior year of college. Went to the team doctor, had a sore throat. I remember we were playing in Colorado I think it was against Air Force. A sore throat. It wasn't even strep throat. It was a sore throat. Go to the team doctor, and she gave me like unlimited refills of Vicodin. I thought it was funny at the time because
wow,
we thought that stuff was funny. We didn't know the dangers of it, but I had unlimited refills. I was a heavy drinker in college. I was a heavy drinker like after college, but I didn't like drinking in college. I never liked drinking. I liked the effect of drinking. I liked, to relax after games. I liked to, kick back and blow off steam. And I realized, 2 Vicodin and 2 beers, I'm good for the whole night. And that just that was the ritual. I didn't have to drink as much. I was more, my recovery was a lot quicker for the next day. I was able to get more work done. Than before you knew it, I just kept on going back, getting refills. Upon graduation, I ended up getting hurt training for the league, and the Vicodin didn't work. So they upgraded me to Norco. I got real depressed because my friends at the time, they were playing on the next level. I was not, and my agent actually told me that I should probably take a year off to heal because I'd be red flagged as injury prone if I still try to enter the draft. I started selling the Vicodin on the side and started partying harder with it. And what a lot of people don't realize, like back then, this was like 05, 06, we didn't have Obamacare, so I just fell off the school's insurance plan, and I had an $800+ habit. I did not know. So I was depressed, so they gave me Zoloft. I couldn't sleep. I was popping all these pills. They gave me Ambien. And now I don't have a job. I don't have any job skills. All I knew was football. I was an art major. I tried to be a starving artist. Chicago is the wrong city to be a starving artist in because you're cold. It's way too cold. And I was homeless for a little bit. Like, literally, I was homeless. I really needed those pills. And it got to the point where I did a couple of unscrupulous things. Luckily, like one of those things was selling weed, cannabis illegally on the streets of Chicago. I had a top 10 university degree. Actually, I had 2 of them. I was art theory and practice and communications double major, and I minored in economics. And 3.1 GPA, and I couldn't get a job. I had no skills, and I found myself bouncing at a bar in Wrigleyville, Chicago, selling weed behind the bar in the alley to tourists just to support this opioid habit and just so I can get by.
Highly educated seller.
I was able to identify, identify the right clientele. It sucked. A lot of people didn't know that I was an addict at the time, and it was kind of taboo to even talk about that. I won't say his name because I don't have his permission to speak on it. One of my roommates in college, he ended up making it, to the next level, and I actually ended up staying with him for a couple of weeks at one point. And it was even crazier on the next level. He had like these Costco-sized bottles of painkillers. Like, it was nuts.
Yeah, I really think of the NFL in the same way I look at the tobacco industry, that they would sacrifice the lives of their players because they know that they have 100 other players just about as good that'll do anything to take that position, and they can abuse their players, and they outlaw cannabis, but they give them opioids like that's the first line agent, and it's really not.
I'm a strong believer that everything happens for a reason. The universe makes no mistakes. And I wasn't ready for the next level. I think I probably would have died, whether it was an overdose, whether it was like partying like crazy. It wasn't meant for me to be, in the NFL, to me to make the next level for whatever reason. One of the drugs that I never was introduced to, and I'm so glad I wasn't, was Toradol. So I hear so much about guys and I think they like run through a wall, like nothing can stop them on that stuff. I was one of those guys. And I was the biggest strong safety in the nation, 227. I still ran a 4.440, I can say that. I was a freak of nature, like one of those guys, but I couldn't stay out of the training room. And I can't help but think, like looking back on it, it was probably because I was popping those pills. It was one injury after the other. I never got hurt like that when I was in high school. If I was given like those next level drugs where I can actually take these pills and go out on game day and perform with them, I would have felt like I was invincible. Another a result of college football is my CTE. I don't know how bad my CTE is. Luckily, I do not have the violent tendencies. Like, I have memory lapses. I remember specifically I have a big scar like on my forehead, like right here, from my helmet came off in a game and I still ran right through a guy like it was nothing. It cracked my head open. I didn't care. It was rough. And once I got past like living on the streets and I actually settled into my daily 95 hamster wheel gig, I was a secret addict with a Cadillac healthcare plan. I found out this $800 a month habit that I had, that Cannabis was supplying for me. It was only $40 now with copays, right? So of course I'm gonna be running through those copays on a lot higher level. And now you're introducing the partying again, and it's not looked down upon by any of my colleagues at work as long as I'm performing. And it wasn't until 7 years into my corporate career in finance, that's when I actually found cannabis as medicine. And I was 100% skeptic before. It worked. I didn't know any of the science behind it. I didn't believe in any of the science behind it. I didn't believe in any of the medical usage behind it. But I'll never forget, man, like 6-7 months like after I started, I just didn't need it anymore. I did continue to party like on those pills like a little bit like afterwards. And that's more of like the financial background and in that lifestyle that was very problematic with people of a mindset like myself. But I didn't need them anymore, and it was crazy. Like I felt free. And at that point, I became an evangelist for cannabis as medicine. I wanted to dive deeper into why, the science behind it, why I didn't need it anymore, and I wanted to learn more about the people who had similar experiences to me. And unfortunately, because it was so taboo at the time, I couldn't talk to any of my athlete friends about it. They thought I was crazy. Some of them
on a regular basis, so it was taboo in that regard too, as well.
yeah, and they couldn't use that, but they can pop these pills. To this day, I remember this heated argument I got into with my best friend at the time at a Super Bowl party. I was trying to tell him how, cannabis actually saved me. It got me off of opioids. And he was just like laughing at me, calling me a pothead. I was like, I might well be a pothead. I'd rather be that than like a pill popping asshole, right? And
Pill popping asshole.
yeah, and the craziest thing about that was the top two spots for Super Bowl commercials is alcohol and pharmaceuticals. like number one, why are you even allowed to advertise pharmaceutical drugs? Number two, you have this big game, right? There's this huge game. People are driving to these Super Bowl parties. People are driving to the bar. How many people you think are mixing their prescription drugs with that alcohol at that moment? If you have any of these symptoms, make sure you see your doctor. And I can't remember at what point it really clicked in my head, like, that's what we were doing. Like, we were beta testing for Big Pharma. Because we were the guinea pigs for them. It was embarrassing. I was a top tier athlete at a top 10 university.
You were in a position you never thought you would be in high school or even in college, probably.
Ever. And I was an addict. And I was afraid of ever saying that. I never thought I'd be in that position. I thought I was so strong-minded, right? I think like being an addict is all about your mindset and like, oh, I can stop doing this. But I was literally breaking into cars so I can find change, so I can add my change up to get to that $800 mark so I can get these pills monthly. And that was me post-college, and that's the one arrest that's still on my record, right? Luckily I didn't have to get expunged because I was criminal trespassing in Chicago, strung out looking for pill money, breaking into cars in Wrigleyville, Chicago, trying to find dollar bills, loose change, whatever I could so I can get more pills.
His withdrawal is so horrific that you'll do anything to get yourself back to that comfortable position that at least you feel normal at that point, rather than in this horrible withdrawal syndrome.
Trekking back into like that whole mindset that I was in, that's probably the most challenging thing I've ever done in my adult life. Like going back to that period of time, I was so vulnerable. It was so oxymoronic, because I'm big machismo, like a huge football player, and like 4% body fat.
And physically.
Right, like you have like all these muscles. You're jacked up, you're big star, but I just felt so weak on the inside, and I couldn't talk to anybody about it, and that was like the worst thing. You had to present yourself as being this type of person, or you wouldn't be respected on or off the field. It sucked. It sucked to be in that position. And I hope that we have progressed as a society to where we are currently, that we don't have to live in those shadows. If we're having issues with substance abuse, it just all clicked. I was like, this is the same thing over and over again, and people are getting served pills that they do not need. They're becoming guinea pigs, and nobody wins from that. Nobody wins except for the bank accounts and the big pharmaceutical companies. So I'm so very glad that you're doing what you're doing, Dr. Dan. I'm so very glad that Mila was able to take me to a place where I was comfortable enough to tell that story, as more therapeutic than anything I've ever done in my life. And cannabis did save my life. And if I can at least persuade somebody to look at cannabis as an option, um, other than just saying like, okay, I need opioids, then I feel like it was worth it, you know?
Rico, how did you first came to try cannabis, and how did you know how to use it medicinally when you started?
Well, I first got to know cannabis when I was young, actually, in middle school. And it was more of an alternative for me because I was, hanging with older kids and smoking cigarettes, and they were terrible. And the cannabis that we had at that age was terrible too. So it wasn't like it was a great experience or anything like that. It was just something different to do. I think medicinally, the first time I ever used it was, well, knowingly. I should probably state the difference there. As an adult, um, 7 years in corporate finance, when I actually got called out for being a addict. Didn't know much about anything behind the drug. I wasn't really a believer in medicinal cannabis. Dispensary owner gave me tincture and edible and a strain to substitute out the pills that I was using. And a few months later, it was like 6, 7 months later, I didn't need the pills anymore. That was the only thing that ever broke my addiction, period. Self-medicating, I did it a lot of the time, probably when I was in college. We had a rough practice, when I had lots of bumps and bruises. I just didn't know that I was, in fact, using it medically, or I was self-medicating. I just thought like, oh, I really need sleep tonight. I'm gonna smoke some weed. Oh, I really don't really feel like partying tonight. It's a rough practice. I'm gonna smoke a little weed to recover better and come back fresh tomorrow. I didn't really think of that as wellness. I didn't really think of that as medicine. It was just something that I did quietly, secretly, because I didn't want to try the alternatives. My body was telling me that the alternatives were not good for it. You know, that's my journey into the medical realm. And then when I actually was able to break my addiction and nothing else worked, that's when I became a believer in more in plant science. Number one, more in cannabis as medicine, and I really wanted to spread the word about it and get more information to people who might be in the same boat as I was.
Did you notice any benefits when you were using it after a practice for recovery? Did you notice that it improved
Oh yeah,
tolerance or recovery time?
I wouldn't say it improved my pain tolerance because I never really um, consumed before playing at higher levels. Um, Pun there. I do know that the recovery time sped up drastically, exponentially even, where a lot of the opiates or the opioids that I was using would mask. It would still be drawn out, but I'd be able to tolerate the pain. Uh, Cannabis got me back to where I needed to be a whole lot quicker.
Any particular strain, or was it any particular strategy to it?
At that time, we didn't know what strains were. You know, and this is '01 to '05, and that's the sad part is a lot of people still don't know what strains are as adults in America today, and where it's legal in more states than it's not. And I was one of those people. We just knew it as fire, you know. It's got the fire, got the dro, got the hash, whatever that meant. We didn't know. We just had nicknames for whatever cannabis we were consuming. We smoked what we could find, and that was it. It wasn't particularly safe or regulated, but it worked. You know, as I've gotten older, I've chronicled a lot of the negatives that we've seen happen in the cannabis industry, from falsified lab testing to pesticides, overusage of pesticides, mold, pathogens in the cannabis, even the vape crisis. Those didn't come along until it was industrialized. In hindsight, would I have used it as medicine solely knowing that it would be able to help me? No. I was just willing to try something as a last resort. And it should never come down to that, you know? You should be educated. You should be able to choose a holistic path, a natural path, if you're aware of all the negatives that are on these opioids, you know?
Right.
An advertisement comes out for one of these pills and it has more side effects than benefits. Like,
The advertisements on TV, and 3/4 of the commercial, they're talking about the side effects and what you need to talk to the doctor about.
exactly.
So once you did start using cannabis more medicinally, what did your average day look like? What was the regimen like for you in terms of mode of delivery? How did you said you mentioned some tinctures. Also, did you know the strains at that point, or the combinations of CBD and THC? I realized that was probably early on, but I'm sure you learned a lot as you went about using it medicinally. And then what amounts did you use? What frequency? What did your average day look like?
Right. So the CBD dropper he gave me was a 1-to-1. It was a 1-to-1 CBD dropper, and I would use that in addition to the pain meds that I was taking. I would take half of a pill and a single dropper of a 1-to-1 CBD. The cannabis that I would smoke in place of Ambien that I was using, he would give me like a heavy OG strain that would knock me out, so I wouldn't really need the Ambien anymore. For my other pills that I was taking, it was Adderall, Norco, Ambien, and Vicodin. And
Wow.
yeah, for the other ones, pretty much stayed on Blue Dream, because I was like the only one that I can remember what the strain name was. But yeah, Blue Dream and a lot of like Granddaddy Perp for the sleeping, but he was sprinkling some other stuff in between.
They're very high in myrcene, which is a known sedative. So both the metabolites of THC as well as the myrcene really give you a nice sedative effect and help you get to sleep more quickly and stay asleep longer.
It worked. It was crazy because I didn't believe in any of that stuff. I literally thought that, medical grade weed was the best stuff that you can get on the market. That was it. Like, there was no like, oh yeah, I'm a freedom fighter for cannabis and cannabis usage. I was definitely not one of those people. I was a heavy drinker, occasional recreational drug user, and I smoked weed to smoke weed. And then when I actually used it with a purpose, or consumed for a purpose, it really just like flipped a switch on, like, wow, like I don't need to be popping these pills. I don't need to be reliant on this drug system, which I know is bad for me. And this is around the time where the opioid crisis was really picking up, and people were really beginning to see the downside of using all of these drugs, especially with former athletes. It was really tough because I wasn't able to directly speak on an educational track with a lot of my football former teammates and friends, because they were made it to the professional ranks and they couldn't get caught with that.
Opioids all day, but they couldn't get caught with a positive cannabis test.
Exactly. And I was just lucky in college because we knew when the drug testing cycle was. That's the most fucked up thing about it is, if you're a scholarship athlete at Northwestern University, when I was there, it was $47,000 a year. Now it's $73,000 a year. So you are a So you are a $300,000 investment for the team, right? If you're a scholarship athlete like myself, or at the time it was $250,000 because I was there for 5 years. Do you really think that they're going to randomly drug test you and take a chance of losing you from the starting ranks when they spent $250,000 on you. Like, no. So I was never one of the guys on the team that was randomly tested. It was always walk-ons, non-scholarship athletes, or if you were in the doghouse with the coach, if you got in trouble for something, they would end up randomly testing you.
In what ways do you think that cannabis actually helped you to get off opioids? Like what problems did it specifically address, such as pain or sleep, or what specifically did it address?
Well, the biggest one was sleep. I couldn't sleep at all. I would go 2-3 days without sleep. High stress environment at work. I was always traveling, hotel to hotel, city to city. Sometimes I'd go 10 days straight and not even be home in Chicago. It was great to sleep again.
Handle all that stress when you don't get a good night's sleep ahead of time. You just don't have the reserve to deal with it in constructive ways the way you would otherwise.
Absolutely. It was high pressure. Like it was a high pressure job being in corporate finance. I would have $1 billion proposals, different sales quotas every single month that I'd have to hit, different people that I'd have to see, and a lot of it was just chance. So there's a lot riding on my position, and I wouldn't sleep well. The other thing was the pain, though. I was sure that I was going to have another surgery. I have 2 bulging discs, L3, L4 vertebrae. I lost a lot of weight. I lost about like 40 pounds, and it allowed me to sleep comfortably. That was the best thing for me. I was able to start yoga, and I didn't have to have disc replacement surgery that I thought that I was going to have. And I still have it to this day. A lot of stretching exercises and mild cannabis usage to loosen myself up in the morning. It's been a great service to all of my ailments that stemmed from college football.
With respect to back surgery, the conventional wisdom is as long as you can put that off as possible, the better, because injuries are not as perfected as they are, say, for hip replacement. And so, we still have a lot to learn, and it's only going to get better. And there are negative effects that can occur when you slice and dice the spinal cord.
No, absolutely. Since the doctor told me I was going to have surgery, it's been 12 years since he told me that, right? And 3 new procedures have come out, like a lot more minimally invasive than the original. And on all of the results, it's always a 50-50. Some people it works really well with, other people, like, they're screwed for life. They really, really mess their backs up even worse. So it's not really giving me confidence going in there. And one thing that I've learned to help me also was acupuncture. And I never even thought about acupuncture until I got into more holistic wellness practices. So
what's interesting is acupuncture actually activates the endocannabinoid system. So part of the way that it works is through that same system that cannabis uses, the body's own endocannabinoid system. A lot of these modalities, you also mentioned yoga. That's another great way to kind of upregulate the endocannabinoid system and kind of help yourself overall in terms of wellness.
Right, that's crazy. I never would have even thought that, but it makes perfect sense that that's the only thing that worked.
Right, and it didn't give you an addiction like opioids and no risk of overdose and die from it.
Right. Then it was more so for sleep and in the morning. That's why I had Blue Dream in the morning. I wouldn't smoke to get high. I would smoke to organize my thoughts, to focus more in the morning because I had ADHD. And when I was out walking the dog, I'd have a little puff, and I'd be ready to have a cup of coffee and be ready to get the day started. I wouldn't be all jumbled up in my head with a bunch of different things. Oh, when I'm going to do this? I'm not efficient enough. Self-doubt. There was none of that anymore. I was able to think clearly for the first time in a long time. Yeah, today my regimen's a little different. I actually really like 1-to-1 CBD to THC flower. And I think that's more of, I don't know if that's more of my cannabis palate has evolved, or if it's that it's a lot more functional for me. But I like one-to-one flower. I'm able to be
Modulates the psychoactive effects of the THC and really gives you a lot clearer head. You still can feel good, but it doesn't give you that cloudy sense that THC alone often does.
I'm able to actually get work done, and I'm not really abrasive. Just a little bit. I don't smoke to like get high anymore, like during the week at least. On the weekends, I like to kick back a little bit, but on the weekdays, it's more of a medicinal. It's more of a wellness um, lane that I play in order to sort my thoughts and chill out in high stress environments.
When you were in this process of getting off of opioids, making a transition off, um, were there challenges that you were not able to address with cannabis? Problems that you still struggled with at that time that you would address now if you had the chance to do it over again?
Um, if I had the chance to do it over again, no, I wouldn't do it any other way. And here's why: because I truly believe, the universe makes no mistakes. Everything happens for a reason. I'm happy with the place that I am emotionally. I'm happy with the person that I've become on an education level, because I'm able to bring more people into the fold. I'm able to connect with people and really help them with their issues, because they're going through a lot of the same stuff that I did. And if I didn't go through what I did, I wouldn't be where I am today, and I wouldn't be on the positive part of this side of this movement either. I've helped a lot of people get medicine when they need it. One of the most proud moments of my life is getting a cannabis roller to my grandfather and him being able to dance for the first time in 10 years.
What a beautiful image.
Right. And he's don't mean to make this commercial. We can edit this out if you'd like, but like, he loves midnight, right? He loves Cocoon Midnight. Like, absolutely. That's his favorite.
Which is a great 1-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC, balanced kind of strain with some nice, happy limonene and calming linalool. It's a great strain. I really like. It's my favorite of the Cocoon strains. Also,
yeah, he absolutely loves it, and whenever he comes out here, he wants to get more. and I have to explain to him that where he lives, it's only available medical, and he has to run the gamut just to try to get medical cannabis in Florida. So
it can be expensive too, unfortunately.
Very expensive. So, that's another thing. Teaching people, educating across generations, so the elderly know that they're taking safe products.
It's interesting. I would say now over half of my medical consultations for medical cannabis are for older adults, because a lot of the issues that they face, like pain and difficulty with sleep, stress and anxiety, things like that, are well addressed by cannabis, and they are being told by their peers that it can be helpful for older adults. It's hard to overcome some of the bias of having grown up in the just say no to drugs era, but there are a lot of older adults that are interested. It's the number one fastest growing segment of the population that use cannabis. It's great that your granddad was able to find benefit from that. Go back to what we were talking about, where you were on your quest to get off of opioids and using cannabis medicinally. Were there other modalities that you used as well? You mentioned yoga and other things like acupuncture, I think you mentioned as well. Meditation, exercise. What else did you find to be helpful in promoting your wellness as you went through this process?
It's crazy. When I really ramped up my cannabis consumption on the medical side, that's when I became a more elite athlete. I was
regional competitor for CrossFit.
Wow.
Awesome.
I got down to like 4% body fat, and I was like traveling. And had I had tried earlier, I wouldn't have succumbed to my football injuries that finally came, to bite me in the butt. And my discs were always bothering me, so I couldn't really lift as heavy as I wanted to. I reacted very, very positively to the plant, and it just seemed like I was always in a better mood. I was always more energetic, believe it or not, like all the time. And I just wish more people would actually at least listen. I'm not going to push people and say, "Oh yeah, you should definitely try this or you should try that." I never try to be a person to push somebody into something that they're not comfortable with. A lot of the people that have not at least uh, tried to replace their opioids with cannabis to actually just like look at the science, look at the research. I think that's the coolest thing about where we are right now, because 5 years ago you couldn't find any reliable information online. There's still a bunch of reefer madness saying that cannabis like makes you delusional. It's worse than any other drug combined. Like they didn't deschedule it in the U.S. yet, right?
CBD is in the process of being descheduled, but THC is still Schedule
Yes,
1.
one.
There is legislation in Congress that
Yeah.
looks to deschedule cannabis, which I think is really, really important in terms of jumpstarting the research. But it's interesting,
Right.
there was a 2017 review of all of the cannabis literature by the National Academy of Sciences. And when they looked specifically at pain relief, they found that there was an extensive body of literature at this point of strong, well-designed studies that show a definite benefit. A lot of that had to do with the development of Sativex or nabiximols, which is a pharmaceutical grade cannabis derived from the plant that has that same one-to-one ratio of CBD to THC that you mentioned before. We know that works really well, in part because of the extensive research that was put into development of this pharmaceutical grade one-to-one ratio of CBD to THC cannabis medication. And they put hundreds of millions of dollars in developing that, and we've really benefited from the research that's come about. But I think that's just going to mushroom once cannabis is descheduled. I agree with you. I think that's a critical step.
Yeah, I agree, and it's very interesting if you look at who is investing in the medical cannabis space. They are the biggest players in big pharma. They all have the largest positions of investment when it comes to publicly traded cannabis companies. Once it is descheduled, you're going to see a lot more R&D budgets, state R&D budgets going into it. The first we saw last year, I believe, was Colorado. It kind of flew under the radar because of COVID-19. Between that and the United Nations and World Health Organization voting to decriminalize as well, more or less, list it as a less dangerous drug. So what their official verbiage was. I think those were the two biggest announcements of the year, and nobody was really paying attention to it. Descheduling will help on the medical side because you're going to have more budget boosted towards cannabis related research. It's really important that folks pay attention to the education side of this industry, to the medical side of this industry, because at the end of the day, people do like to enjoy cannabis, but you're enjoying medicine, right? And I think that's the harder pill for America to swallow is the fact that you can recreationally use medicine, or you can I think that's the toughest thing for people to put together, is the fact that you can use this medicine to kick back and relax, but you can also use this medicine for serious ailments. Maybe that's where the biggest issue is that we need to break down in the common American mind, making them okay with having the substance in both columns there.
And yet what you're alluding to also is that there may be different manifestations, different combinations of cannabis that people use. They may use something that's higher in THC recreationally when they want to relax and enjoy a social experience with other people. Whereas if they're using it in terms of fighting nausea or pain or another problem, say an inflammatory condition like Crohn's disease, they may use a very different strain that has a different combination of cannabinoids and terpenes and other components of the cannabis plant. So it may be the same plant, but it may be a different form that it takes.
My personal thoughts on the holy grail of the cannabis industry is matching, your double helix to your endocannabinoid system, right? So you can truly have designer cannabis, and you can single out certain cannabinoids that benefit me personally over what benefit you, Dr. Dan, or what benefit you, Mila. Because, my wife, she can take 25, 30 milligrams of an edible in one setting. And I'm just like zoned out after 10 milligrams. And so I would really like to see, why certain cultivars affect me differently than others. And I think that's what's exciting about going to the next level. But at the same time, it worries me because the educational gap is already extremely vast between communities that are undereducated, that they're going to miss out not just on the economic boom, but also on the medical boom, because they still think that this is bad, because this drug got your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle, your mother, your father, got them put away, or they got them killed.
And their primary examples
that's the one thing that I do
observing
fear
other
about.
people using cannabis maybe purely for recreational purposes, rather than knowing someone in their family or a friend who
Correct.
has used it medicinally and benefited it from there. Because cannabis has grown mostly by word of mouth, and from from a medical standpoint, I do agree with you that education is super important, and targeting specifically some of these groups. I know that there have been very progressive church groups that have done that. Say a pastor has benefited from the medical use, but just other groups within the community being able to validate the medical uses of cannabis and separate from the recreational uses or adult uses.
Being able to speak out, as a community leader, speak out and recant the way that cannabis helped you. I've been in that position, and it's tough, especially if you're in a more conservative work environment, you're in a more conservative social environment, and people look down upon stoners. They look down upon, counterculture.
I would say that's true even in the medical profession.
Yeah, that's why
I'm like, people's interface.
We're so blessed to have doctors like yourself, Dr. Dan, that are willing to step up and reveal information that as it is. History will not look kindly upon the U.S. from the late '80s until last couple of years, when they're just pushing opioids on people. It won't look kindly on like the medical field in that time. I trusted my team doctor. He was giving me samples, medical samples of Melexicam, Vioxx, big boxes that would have just like one pill in them. And hey, try some of these. After a game, they'd give us a bag full of 10 of them and to give them a report, or just fill out this form at the end of the day. Like, do you feel this? Do you have this side effect? It was crazy. And those are the people that we trusted. And to find out that they were all getting, they're getting paid off by Big Pharma, it's not just disappointing. I became an addict because of it.
Right, your doctor is someone that you should be able to trust, who has your best health in mind and is your advocate. And unfortunately, doctors have neglected that or chosen to disregard it, or chosen not to think about it. It's interesting with respect to cannabis, the doctor's attitudes historically, because when cannabis was first made illegal in 1937, cannabis was the third most commonly prescribed medication of all the medicines available to American physicians. Was a combination actually of cannabis and codeine, which was their opiate at the time. And it was even well known back then that cannabis and opioids had a very synergistic effect and helped each other work better together so that you could use lower doses of each one. And the American Medical Association, which I disagree with on a lot of their positions, but
Right.
at the time, they advocated strongly that cannabis remain legal for medical uses. Unfortunately, their medical and scientific advice was overruled by the politicians of the day, which shows that things haven't really changed that much, unfortunately.
From prohibition then to prohibition now, it all goes back to whoever's holding the dollar bill in those influential positions of power. And they don't like change, right? But we're in a place now where Rome is burning all around us. And you know, the one hope that we have is cannabis. You look at all this political strife that's going on, and there's a poll taken last week. People voted, I think it's 83 to 17%. People that would rather have legal cannabis than $15 minimum wage. The one thing that people can agree on in this country is cannabis should be legal.
Right.
And it's not.
People who come home from combat veterans with PTSD, for them, cannabis, as we've seen, makes a huge difference in how they can handle stress and in their own process of working with PTSD. And I know that PTSD, of course, is not only from combat, from childhood abuse, neglect, to some traumatic experiences, it
Right.
accumulates and
Sexual
becomes
violence.
PTSD. Exactly, yeah. And when you and I, Rico, worked together, I remember how profound your PTSD suddenly came to the surface when we were working on your Tedx talk.
It's tough. It's tough to go down that route. And cannabis really did help me. It helped me learn to actually talk through a lot of those issues. It helped me not be as reactive, but it also helped me find understanding within myself. That's just on the mental side of things, like me dealing with PTSD, me dealing with the trauma, childhood trauma that I never dealt with growing up. Everything influences us. Everything tells us, you know, like, oh yeah, he's having a rough day. You should have a drink. You should. Oh yeah, you're having a rough day. You know, I had a rough week. I'm gonna go on a bender this weekend. You know, I could do some street drugs and drink heavily. What? You're like what? Like what logic does that make? But
Well,
everything around us is pushing these things as the antidote to you.
well, the logic there is that alcohol, for example, as well as recreational drugs, numb the pain and they take your mind off your problems, of your issues, and of your emotional pain. So they're very destructive. In the beginning, when you're trying to use cannabis to deal with PTSD, it also is serving like a distraction from pain, but at the same time, it doesn't create that much damage like alcohol. I can't think of anything more destructive than alcohol and tobacco, like through cigarettes.
Yeah, that's definitely true for your body. Cannabis does work in the brain nicely in terms of PTSD, how the brain stores bad or aversive memories and how it accesses them. And Rico, you're exactly correct that it does allow you to approach those topics in a way that's more relaxed and more open to change and to examining them, issues that you may not be able to face otherwise. And so it can be used therapeutically along with therapy and other ways of digging into emotional trauma. It can be assisted by cannabis as well. Usually that's with microdosing, but it can be very helpful. And there's definitely a science behind what you're talking about for sure.
Yeah, it's my understanding from the research that I've read, cannabis helps to drop the cycle, that repetitive obsessive thoughts. It helps to kind of drop it so that you can look into things without putting your limitations from your memories and from the emotions that are stored there.
Right, the memories are not ever present right in front of you, or hovering over you. You're able to forget them for a while, or to not have the same emotional response when you look at them. Yeah, that's definitely found to be true in studies.
Mm-hmm.
Mila, I had a question for you. Since your area of expertise is in this specific area, healing of emotional trauma and complex PTSD and meditation and some of these other interventions, in addition to the use of medical cannabis, what other tools do you see being particularly helpful for people struggling with opioid addiction?
Yeah, I see that people use drugs like opioids specifically often to deal with their emotional trauma, with PTSD, with pain, emotional pain. When we're children, we can't really deal with that effectively. We don't have the frame of reference of what's going on. Let's say when you're 3 years old, when you're 8 years old, or even when you're 15 years old, you're not equipped to deal with some abuse and trauma that may happen. And so you tend to store those memories in a way, sometimes completely suppressing them. But it doesn't mean that these memories do not affect you going forward in the present while you're adult. The only way that I know of works really well is, in addition to using something like harmless like cannabis to help calm that acute PTSD and to allow yourself to kind of dig deeper and to look into the trauma and work with that, because you can't work with something unless you acknowledge that. So once people calm their acute symptoms perhaps with medical cannabis, we're working together using tools like meditation, for example, meditation and mindfulness, where we learn to consciously switch our system from sympathetic, which is fight and flight, to parasympathetic, which is more of a relaxation, creativity, and flow, like being in a zone. So meditation is very helpful, and we worked with both of you, with Rico and you, Dr. Dan, using meditation to address these old traumas. Another, of course, mindfulness during the day. So even if you meditate, let's say in the morning and in the evening, and you develop new skill of focusing your mind, focusing your emotions, looking into the witness who is actually experiencing it all. So put that kind of a distance. For example, say that not that I am in pain, rather like I feel pain, or who is feeling that? It's not you are, it's who is feeling that, who is behind that, who is the witness. And using meditation, especially focused meditation, that also unlocks your internal energy, that is term in Sanskrit used Kundalini energy. It helps to loosen up that subconscious traumas so that they could come up to the surface, and at the same time being more malleable for change. And then we're doing psychotherapy, sometimes with meditation, sometimes very deep meditation that goes into more like hypnotic meditation, hypnosis. And we look and analyze what happened to you in your childhood, or during your combat situation, or in your adult life when you got abused. And we look into those situations from that hypnotic state and bringing them in a proper perspective. So while they couldn't be addressed properly when it happened, let's say in childhood or later, we can address it the way they should be addressed right now. So with cannabis, harmlessly able to put the kind of emotional distance a little bit between your pain and yourself and put yourself in a position of a witness. At the same time, through meditation, hypnosis, and doing therapeutical techniques that I have learned from my Buddhist teacher, but also through psychoanalysis, through cognitive behavioral therapy, through dialectical behavioral therapy, all the methods, everything kind of creates the environment and opportunity for it to be not only tolerable, not only manageable, but actually to cure it. So the combination works really, really well.
Right.
And there's definitely data that have shown meditation and some of these other interventions, like cognitive behavioral therapy in particular, have been shown in the setting of opioid addiction of being demonstrably helpful. And I agree with you that in combination with cannabis, it can be even more so that they are
Yeah.
synergistic and that they can help each other work better together.
Yeah, exactly. Because if somebody is in moderate pain, maybe they don't need anything. Maybe they don't need any other substances, so to speak, you know. But if somebody is in a lot of pain, or if something has been suppressed for many years, and we are triggered by situations that happen now that have nothing to do, like they don't warrant that kind of emotional outburst or that kind of a reaction, but these reactions are because they are triggers from that accumulated stress, accumulated trauma.
My senior year of college, I went to the team doctor with a sore throat. She gave me unlimited refills of Vicodin.
Right.
She threw the kitchen sink at me when I just came for a glass of water, right? And I ended up, getting in trouble later for exactly that. What I thought was harmless coming from somebody that I trusted. And a lot of people are afraid to ask for a second opinion. A lot of people are afraid to ask why. Why am I using this drug? Give me more information. You always get those information packets after they hand you the drugs. After they hand you the pills, like, oh yeah, here's instructions, more information on the drug if you want to read it. Like, how many people actually read those read those instructions or read those, the disclaimers that you just gave away, your rights by taking these pills? How many people actually read that? You should be able to ask openly, what are some safer holistic alternatives, like rather than them sending you to somebody who is not well versed in medical nomenclature, not well versed in like the same path. Like, why are they not combined? Why are you not, like, why do you not go to school and learn both methods? Don't want to get too like historical or anything. I think that was like with the Andrew Carnegie back in the day. He really wanted to run like the hospitals and have them be profitable. And there's no profit in a cure, Mila.
I understand. Yeah, it's like it's preventive care doesn't get funding. It's only sickness care that gets funding.
And we Americans, we love the story of a comeback kid, right? We just love a good comeback story. Like, what if we just live life ahead? How about that?
Yeah, exactly. That's tragic. Like, Rico, would you please, like, what would be your advice to people who are right now? There is an opioid like catastrophic pandemic in the country. What would you tell these people who are facing opioid addiction or maybe feeling helpless, and people who care for them?
Number one, seek help.
Where? Who would they go to? Which help?
Number one, I would say seek mental mental help, there's lots of outlets available right now because of the pandemic. A lot of people aren't aware of that. A quick Google search. You need to make sure that you're taking care of that upstairs first, because you can't do anything else if your mental acuity is not on point, right? That's number one. I'd say look into their mental health. Number two, seek out multiple points of view on whatever your ailment is. One of the positives that came out of the Trump administration, people on the left and right are actually asking questions, right? A lot of it can be thrown out, the window as a pure speculative conspiracy theory, but we really need to start exercising that critical thinking when it comes to professionals in a capitalist society.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, that's human nature. Greed is part of human nature. And when people have that big carrot dangling in front of them and they're caught in a weak moment, they just might go for that carrot, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the sad part. But I would say you have multiple points of view as far as information on whatever your ailment is. Personally, I would always try cannabis. Cannabis is so stringently regulated, like more than the tomatoes that you get at the store, right? You have no idea like what kind of processes that those went through, but you trust it. Cannabis is so controlled, is so stringently tested, so scrutinized that we are literally consuming some of the cleanest product ever.
All of those issues that you talked about before, like molds and pesticides and so forth, they're all required to be tested by the state of California and a lot of other states around the country. And I think they definitely should be. And they've only expanded the list of things that they test for. And I agree with you that the cannabis, medical cannabis, is much, much safer and much more well regulated, and it should be. So I think we're at a place where people can feel confident in trying cannabis, that if they go about it in a, using a start low and go slow kind of mentality, they're less likely to come into problems that they might have, 5 or 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I don't remember the name of right now, but there are a couple of different apps for the phone that make that much easier
is
to
one
guide
of
you
them.
to do that.
But I think would ideally be somebody who has a problem, consider that, and go see or telemedicine see someone who is a cannabis doctor specifically, like somebody like Dr. Dan, for example. So it's much less error there because and it will be kind of under the guidance of the expert.
Yeah, I think they could really seeking out a doctor like Dr. Dan, who has the credentials, who has the background already in the field, both in mainstream medicine as well as medicinal cannabis. You get a more well-rounded point of view. We actually do have, doctors in the space now that are visible. And I think that's one of the most awesome things ever. It was a trial and error when I got in it. And now we have medical professionals in place that can actually get you well-researched information, whether they did it themselves, like Dr. Dan, or, they're practicing from programs that, from an accredited point of view, right? It's cool the stuff the Knox doctors are doing. It's cool that you can go online and you can actually see medical doctors. You can see physicians that have spoken out about cannabis and have spoken these truths into power. It's incredible. It's a great thing, right?
I think it's really important to emphasize that there is now truly a specialty in medical cannabis. And I think that when you consider how the endocannabinoid system is so new, only discovered in the 90s, that most doctors who are practicing now have never heard of the endocannabinoid system, despite the fact that there are tens of thousands of articles that have been written about it. And so most doctors speak for lack of a better word, from a position of ignorance, that they just don't know about the medical effects and the possibilities of medical cannabis because they've never been taught that. And they haven't had any reason to do any research into it or haven't felt the need to. And so they're not really able to make a recommendation. Even if you were to have a discussion with your doctor, which I think is generally advisable, you don't know for sure whether the doctor is educated in medical cannabis or not. You don't know what their attitudes toward medical cannabis are, but um, if they don't know, they should tell you they don't know and recommend that you talk to someone who does know. That's a typical referral that people do for all kinds of specialties. Or they should, but what often happens is they don't know, and so they go with the line that they're fed from the DEA, which is that medical cannabis has no known medical benefits and is only harmful and highly addictive, which is completely untrue and absolutely irrational that it's scheduled that way. So I do think that it can be helpful to have a consultation with someone who is a specialist, both to maximize your possible benefits from the use of medical cannabis, as well as minimize that trial and error that you went through, and maybe experiencing some negative effects that could be avoided if you had a guidance in implementing that treatment. And cannabis is a powerful medication, and it really should be treated like any other powerful medication, which usually requires a doctor to advise patients on how to use it, and if not a prescription, at least a recommendation of how to do that. So I think it can be very helpful, particularly for vulnerable people who are going through something very complex and difficult, like detox from opioids, or older adults who may be vulnerable to side effects that could occur at lower doses that wouldn't necessarily be a problem for people who are younger. But I think definitely certain people, and in general, most people can benefit from improving their knowledge of cannabis, and that may in particular be helpful to get a medical consultation from a doctor or other informed healthcare professional. But thank you for the advertisement. At the end of this conversation, we are going to have contact information for each one of us. And if you're interested in a medical cannabis consultation, my website address is on there. It's pretty simple: www.drdancannabis.com, and you can request a consultation through the website. I know Mila also offers a lot of ancillary interventions that can benefit people that are trying to get off of opioids, and I think you can book time with you on your website as well, right, Mila?
Yeah, it's miladiamond.com, and there is a contact form there.
I'm coming out with a in-depth paper that's going to have over 100 different references, where I've looked at all of the medical literature on the use of cannabis for opioid addiction. And there's a lot of really important ways that cannabis can be helpful that we haven't had a chance to discuss during this conversation, but we dig into quite in depth in this article. You're welcome to email me at drdanprice1@gmail.com. That's dr.danprice and the number 1 @gmail. And then even better than that is going to my website, which again is www.drdancannabis.com, DANCANNABIS.com. And I can usually get back to you within 24 to 48 hours, and would love to hear from you.
And one more thing I would like to suggest people go and see Rico's Tedx talk, because there he talks specifically about his personal journey. We touched on it lightly today, but in his talk, he was extremely authentic and deep, goes into his experiences and how cannabis helped save his life.
And a link to that TEDx talk is...
Oh yeah, my talk too. I talk about meditation in my talk.
And there'll be links to both of those in the article that I've written. So you can access those through the article as well as through both of these websites.
I can't wait to read that article, Dr. Dan. When is that coming out?
Within the next week.
Yeah, like a few days. There's so much research. It's really exciting. It's an awesome article.
I'm pretty pumped to check that out. We'll definitely push that out for our CANiVISION CANiVISIOnaries all around the country and all over the globe. And then also, and when I edit this, I'm actually going to be running that that graphic from the end. So before the credits at the end, like I usually do in our videos, you'll have like the graphic with both of your contact information there too.
Awesome.
So much love to the both of you. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. This has not only been informative, this has been therapeutic. You know, being in the chair, actually answering some questions today too. I really, really appreciate that. Also, I forgot what it feels like to be in the hot seat. You know?
Thank you, Rico, for being willing to do that and making yourself open and informative. That I've learned a lot, and I know that people who are in that process of trying to get off opioids or have loved ones that are trying to get off opioids really benefit from hearing from people who've gone through that. It's so stories are so powerful, and your story in particular. Thank you very much for sharing with us. I appreciate that.
I appreciate both of you. Have a great weekend, all of that. Enjoy life, stay healthy, and anything you guys need, always got somebody down here in Southern California for you. All right, much love, and remember, when life gives you no place else to turn, you gotta turn up. Peace and love to both of you.